Cindy. Rare cars, they didn't have big production runs. And so every time he's done it, he's raced a car for 5 years and he sells it. And they appreciate it. He's actually about to do that. We got it.
Okay, good morning. Welcome to the, this is the second meeting of the Joint Local Government Committee. And today we're going to have a focus on law enforcement. But Madam Clerk, if you could call the roll.
Senator Alvarado.
Here in the room.
Senator Harper Angel.
Present remotely off campus.
Senator McDaniel.
Present in the 23rd District.
Senator McGarvey.
Present in the district.
Senator Nemus. Senator Schroeder. Senator Southworth. Senator Storm. Senator Thayer.
Here in the room.
Senator Wheeler.
Present in the district.
Representative Bentley. Representative Bray.
Present in the room.
Representative Brown. Representative Dixon. Representative
Present.
Donahue.
Yes, ma'am, present.
I think that was Dixon.
Representative Fleming.
Present in the room.
Representative Frazier.
Present in the room.
Representative Huff. Representative Imes.
Present in the room.
Representative Johnson.
Present in the room.
Representative Koenig.
Present in the room.
Representative Lockett.
Here in the room.
Representative Marzin.
Present in my district.
Representative Meeks. Representative Miller. Representative Reed.
Here in the room.
Representative Roberts.
Present in the room.
Representative Thomas.
Present in the room.
Representative Meredith.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Mills.
Here in the room. Thank you. We have a quorum, and before we get started, I am going to yield to Representative Michael Meredith for a few words.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As many of you all know, we lost a dear friend and a member of this committee over the last couple served with us in person. In our friend and former majority floor leader, Representative John Bam Carney. And anybody that knew Bam knew that he was both a devoted representative to the people of Taylor and Adair County and to the Commonwealth as a whole. They knew him as a loyal friend, a doting father, and somebody that you could count on anytime that you looked to him for help. And so at this time, I would just like to take a brief moment of silence to honor his service to the Commonwealth and his legacy with us. Amen. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Co-Chair Meredith. That's very apropos. Representative Carney was a great member. We need to approve our minutes from June 15th meeting of this year. Is there a motion?
So move.
Have a motion. Second. All in favor say aye. Aye. All right. Our minutes are approved. We have two sections of our meeting today, and we're going to flip these. But before we get started on that, we have a new committee staff member that is present, and okay. And this is to the left over here by Cheryl is Chris Jakovic. Is that Djokovic? And he is a graduate of Center College and UK Law School, and is married to Dinah, and has recently welcomed a 7-month-old baby. So he's learning about parenthood as well. So welcome to our committee, and we're glad to have you. This is a good committee, and you'll learn quite a bit. So thank you so much for being here. All right, so we are going to flip our agenda and talk about police officer recruitment and retention first. And we have with us a couple of representatives, and like for Heath Cox, the chief of the Henderson Police Department, to come forward. He is my police chief and somebody that I know really well and works well in our community. And I've invited Chief Cox to come in and talk about recruiting and retention in Henderson, kind of a mid-sized city in Kentucky. So, Chief Cox, the floor is yours.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to come and speak with you all. Police recruitment and retention is something that has been my companion for the last 3 years since I've been the police chief. Something that I've thought about day and night. And so what I'm going to present is what we have done in Henderson as far as police recruitment and retention. And that'll be the first part of the PowerPoint. And then I will show you what I'm going back today, the current issues and how we're going to combat that moving forward, because today at 3 p.m. back in Henderson, I will be speaking to the commissioners at a work session about other steps we can take to get as many qualified people in the door, to get them trained, and to address the issue of not only recruitment but the retention of officers. And then at the end, there'll be some suggestions that I have as far as things that I could ask of you all that we could work together, ideas to move the profession forward, and some. So with that, we will move. Let me get to the PowerPoint here, make sure it works. And so January the 1st, 2019, I formed a committee for recruitment and retention right after I took the seat of police chief. Because when I interviewed for the job in Henderson, I knew that by year 3 we were going to be very short on manpower due to the pending retirements. So far, this is year 3, so this is the toughest stretch that I'm going to have. And it will probably take us a year or two to come out of it with good hires and people who actually stay in the profession. And so I don't believe there's one magic ingredient to recruitment and retention. But I do also believe that if we address the needs of the officers, give them the tools, competitive pay, the benefits that they need, also goes to the type of retirement, that they are the biggest recruiters of the agency. They can also be the ones that tell other officers not to come to your agency. So to address the needs of the officers who are currently there, 79, 80% of everybody who comes, I know, speaking for myself, I learned from the department when I put in over 20 years ago was from an officer that I knew outside of work. And so I would say most of us throughout our lives, every one of my jobs that I've had has been because I knew somebody at that organization. And so therefore it's an imperative that we do whatever we can and keep chipping away at what's out there that we can improve on. And that's where it's great to read other literature. The Police Executive Research Forum is great on recruitment and retention. Also going to chiefs conferences, talking to individuals when you have chiefs of police meetings to find out how other people are doing it. And I'll also say this, first week in August, I have a Department of Criminal Justice training, recruitment and retention class. Because my thing is, if there's something that we have not thought of, that's what we need to do. Because I will say this as well, that I was sharing this with Mark before the session started, that one of the recent interviews that we had with an officer, well, as he was interviewing, he said that it was because of the things that he saw in society that made him want to sign up to be a police officer, because he wanted to make things better. And so I will say this, we may not see the vast number of applicants, because I can say in the past 10 years, we got about 80 to 85% less applications than we used to. But I also believe this, that based on what I'll talk about that we have done, I do believe the quality is there, and we are hiring quality people. It's just a smaller pool. And so that's why it's so imperative, this topic. So I'll just kind of go through here as far as the things that we have addressed. We passed a shift differential, so $1.25 for second shift extra if you work that shift, and then third shift is 75 cents. We did a pay raise back in December of last year, a $2 pay raise, which was very significant. And I'll explain later on how we were able to make that happen. Because if not, we would be under $18 an hour as a city starting out, which I believe is extremely low. So between starting pay, the $2 pay raise, and the shift differential, a new officer can look to make over $20 an hour, which I believe is a good place to start. Additional promotion, something else that we historically never had, or we used corporals that was pretty much a supervisor, but it was unpaid. And throughout my career, I believe that was unjust to have somebody do a job and then not give them any kind of compensation. So that's one of the things that I did. We actually have 2 sergeants on every shift, all 3 shifts. So it added additional promotion opportunities for those already in the organization. Another big issue that we had, and this is how we addressed all the retirements that we knew was coming, the lateral program and retired officer program. The lateral program, what that does is we compensate them for their years of experience up to 10 full years. So wherever they are on our pay scale, with their years of service at 10, that's where they come in at. So that way you can attract those who already have experience, who already certified officer. Retired officer program, that's something that under KRS 95 that allows us to do. You save on pension cost and insurance cost, and you bring back, if you have this mass exodus of experience that walks out the door after 20, 25, 27 years, it is a great way to help train those young officers is bringing that experience back. And so what we've done is, as far as their pay, and I say ours is probably one of the best that I've ever seen in the state, is we pay them as a 20-year patrolman perpetually. So no matter if it's a cost of living, they just stay at that level, but you're paying them for that experience. Very substantial salary, especially if somebody's already drawing a pension and they come back. We have 5 right now. And so between the 5, the laterals, I think we've had at least 4 or 5 laterals. That has really helped sustain us as we're continuing to address new recruits and getting them through the academy. Load-bearing vest, this is huge. I know my lower back from years in the car bothers me. I forgot how comfortable this belt was when I drove to the meeting for 2.5 hours. But load-bearing vest, what it does, officers still have their taser and their firearm on their waist, but everything else is up here. Load-bearing vest, thus, it carries all the weight on their shoulders. So it really takes care of their lower back. And so everybody in patrol now has one if they want one. And so that was a big push to take care of not only the money and also promotion opportunities, but also the manpower through the laterals, retirees, but also their health. Take-home vehicles in the county, that's something that we've stretched out, because before you just had to be in the city or a specialty position. So we have moved that out to the county, and I'll talk about my recommendation later will be to even expand that even further. The awards banquet, I think we went 4 years not having an awards banquet. So that was a big thing for me, not only the pay, the compensation, taking care of your health, other opportunities to expand your career, but also to say thank you for doing the right thing and recognizing individuals. And so that is something that we have done the last 2 years once we brought that back, because I do believe to reinforce the right behavior that you want to see, you have to recognize it. And so that is a big push that we have made. Replenish the vehicle fleet. I think everybody can attest to this, that police cars, we put a lot of miles on them. And we had a lot of wrecked cars, and the revenue wasn't there, the capital money wasn't there. So here recently in the last 2 years, we've been able to replenish the fleet, and I would say our fleet is probably the best it's been in my entire career. And then the officer wellness program. This is something that we have worked on since 2019, and then obviously COVID hit and a lot of things in the world stopped. But we have already reached out, and last month, Help for Heroes is an organization. It's a national program as far as mental health, and it's out of Newburgh, Indiana. We went to Southern Indiana University for a mental health summit, and that was presented. It originated out of Texas, and so my thing is, if we can take care of the officers' physical health, their mental health, take care of them financially to be competitive with wages, give them the right equipment, those things are imperative for us to not only recruit but also retain the officers that really embody those who go out every day, who have honor, professionalism, and dedication, like our values at HPD stand for. And then the biggest thing for me when we have already had 11 retirements in 3 years, and we've got 4 more coming. Supervisors have to hold the line. And what I mean by that is they are the ones that ensure the quality on the street. They're the ones that are the teachers and the coaches. And so that was the big point of emphasis. Historically, we have only sent, the only training for supervisors is what we sent at DOCJT. We would send new supervisors, and who knew, it may be a year or two after you become a supervisor. So we have changed that. It's actually a year-long training. They get something every month, and that's what I'll be doing tomorrow with the new sergeants. We'll be covering additional topics. We have covered the Leadership Challenge. I don't know if you've ever read that book, but it's one of the best books on leadership. We have talked about peer to supervisor, that big change. And the biggest stat that kind of struck me is 75 or 80% of an employee leaving your organization is due to that direct supervisor. So if that's true, then we need to ensure that first line supervisor is being trained and is taking care of the needs of those employees. And so that's where that point of emphasis has been. So this is our current position that we're in. We currently have 6 in training, one of which had just graduated, so he starts tomorrow on the street with a trainer. But we have 5 other recruits that we are, 2's in the academy and 3 we just hired waiting to go. Now with the academy right now, if we're starting a new hiring process this month, we're in the midst of that. So it would be December or January would be the earliest that we could send somebody. And the other thing that we're going to, because of the recent retirements and the backlog, because we're not the only department needing recruits to be trained. And so I understand that. So the thing that we're looking at, and what I'll be talking about today when I go back, is to move to 12-hour shifts to maximize our manpower. Now with that, we reached out to other agencies. We did some research on about 12-hour shifts. Us and one other agency that we called, of like the 12 biggest cities, there's only 2 of us that still do 5/8. Everybody else is doing 10s or 12s. So, and especially with the millennial generation, that got me to think, do we have to change the way we've always done business? And I think we probably do. That 5/8 is probably an old dinosaur that's probably not going to come back if we want to be competitive. If the millennials balance, and rightfully so, work-life balance, then we have to build and have things in place and structures that reflect that. Because if they are the largest working generation currently, already, as of 2019. So therefore, we have to build and have processes in place to provide that work-life balance. Also, something I'm going to talk about today is adjacent county take-homes in Kentucky. So for us, that would be the counties that connect to Henderson. I'm going to ask for permission for the officers who live in those counties to be able to take those vehicles home. And I'll be honest with you, just these 2 things, 12-hour shifts and adjacent county take-homes, we already have 2 officers, obviously, who know these 2 other officers. One officer who lives in Webster County, who works for us, has already said that he's already talked to 2 other officers who work at other agencies, and they're interested just on these 2 things. And so it is huge. And when I go back to the work schedule, the schedule that we're looking at, it's called the Pittman schedule. And one week you would be off Monday, Thursday, and Friday, and the next week you would be off Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday, Sunday. So the worst days off you would have is a Friday one week or a Saturday, Sunday, and then we roll into a Monday the next. So we're looking not only taking care of you financially, mentally, physically, but how can we provide that work-life balance? So that way we're touching every aspect of an individual officer's life. Because it's like this, happy officers recruit other officers. And that's what we're looking at. And also the other thing, we're looking for authorization, to hire public safety officers. And I will go into what that is. Public safety officers is something that I found out about through Hopkinsville Police Department. They have used this for years. Actually, they've had 8 public safety officers, 5 of which went on to become police officers, and 1 of which is a sergeant now. So talking about future recruitment and building pipelines, getting things in place, a public safety officer can be 18, 19, 20, even 21 years old. They don't have to be 21. They don't carry a firearm. But it allows us to bring these individuals in our organization to watch their work ethic, how they interact with others, their character, their ability, and test their desire to see if they would want to be a police officer. Now, obviously, the uniform would look different. The car they would drive would be different. They wouldn't have red and blue lights. They would have yellow lights. Nothing about their uniform would say, I'm the police. But what they would handle, you could see here, and I'll go to the next slide, makes it a little easier. Accidents without injuries, parking problems, motorist assist, and you can see the list there. And these types of calls, about 3,000 a year just for our agency. So what that would do, we would have, I'm asking for 2 public safety officers. So that way, when we go to 12s, I know the workload with as short as we're going to be is going to be massive on our officers. So therefore, that's why I'm asking for public safety officers, not just for the now, which it will help now, but also for the future, because that will be the pipeline for us to get future officers. That you're already starting the recruitment by having a program like this. All right. And the last slide, problems to solve. Now, this is where I'm asking you all to look at, to think about, to ponder, to help us. I think all of us understand that with as many retirements across the state, there is a strong need to get recruits trained. And when I say infrastructure to train new recruits, either that is to add on and build the capacity at DOCJT where they currently are, or have a Western Kentucky academy run by DOCJT. Either it has to expand one way or the other. From everything that I've read from PERF, the millennial generation, they're going to stay 4 to 6 years in a career. So we have about 5,300 officers who are trained through the Department of Criminal Justice. The other ones are trained through other academies. So you think if every 4 to 6 years, if that's the average career, even if you stretch it out to 10, do we have the capacity to meet that need? So I would say look at the structure to see if what we currently have in place can produce the results that we're going to need into the future. And change the way policing is viewed. Now, this is a hard nut to crack here. But I will say one of the things that we have done, we reached out to our local media. We've had a great relationship with them for over 20 years. And she is intentionally working with us to put more positive stories out in the paper, online, on Facebook, social media. We just had a K-9 retire. She did a wonderful story. We had some citizens help one of our officers who fought with a guy into the roadway, and then, citizens stopped to help. Great. Wonderful. And then we also have an officer out at the college as campus security, so she's going to do a story on that as well. I do believe that the more we can put those positive stories out and kind of fight back against the mentality that everybody's against the police, because I'll say this, 90 to 95% of the people back the police 100%, they're just silent about it. And sometimes we only hear the loudest voices. And so I think it's imperative that we do what we can, be mindful about, let's put the story out there as it really is, not some agenda. And then build pipelines for future recruits. I know in Henderson what we have a criminal justice program at the high school that we have used for years to get kids interested, either if it's through the judicial system, to be an attorney, to be police, whatever the case may be. That's a great program. Also, I've talked with our community college about getting a criminal justice program at our local community college. And we have talked about maybe he can do that in the future. And then also the public safety officer position, that would be a pipeline that then if somebody from our interactions when they're 18, 19, we can bring them on board and watch them. Because what we have done up to this point, the skills that we currently have, we're going to have to gain new skills. We're going to have to look at problems a different way. And I think to think outside the box, to to allow citizens in Henderson and other communities to still receive quality service, it may look different than what we're used to, especially if you're struggling to bring in sworn officers. As I'm not saying this is the end all be all, but this is a part of the problem to help solve it. Public safety officers, not only would it meet the need currently, but also provide a means maybe in the future. And then revenue opportunities. I know for me, in the next, let me pull it up. Money's always a thing, right? This is just our 5-year capital plan. I'll just read the total number. I'll round it up, so everybody's probably getting tired of listening to me. The 5-year capital plan. Next year we'll need over $300,000 just on things that I know, and then the next year will be $400,000. The next year will be over $400,000, and the year after that will be over $400,000. And I say that with the pension cost. Just this year was $660,000 for Henderson. Next year will be about the same. And when I talked about the $2 pay raise and the shift differential, and the 2 extra sergeants, I'll explain how I got that. How I was able to do that is I'm holding 6 spots open of my 62 because of the money. So in essence, I'm operating at 56 instead of 62 because then we're using that money. Because my thing is, what good does it do if you pay below average to 100 people or you pay 56 well? I'd rather have 56 paid well that are happy and then able to give them this equipment. So my thing is, with the revenue opportunities, I know what my department and my community situation is moving forward. And I would ask, I know how we operate. We operate under the old 2nd or 3rd class cities, even though we're home rule. I would ask to revisit that and allow every city the same opportunity. If it's food and beverage tax, if it's a liquor tax, whatever it is, to allow every city to have the same revenue streams. Because the pension, I don't think, it's not going back to tier 1 type pensions. I mean, it's always a money thing. And insurance is skyrocketing. I mean, we could talk about that as well. So I would just say, allow us and all the other cities just to have the same playing field. So that way we can get the revenue like others. Because I think we're all doing what we can with the cards we've been dealt. You know, all of us, we inherit the situations we inherit. But I do think together that we have good people at the state level. We got good people across this state. We have good people locally. That I think together we can work through this. Opportunities are there. I think the revenue is just key, because all these ideas about 12s, that costs money. The about adjacent county take-homes cost money. The public safety officer positions take money. And so I would just ask you to look at that and see what opportunities there are that we can level the playing field across the board. So
thank you, Chief. It's a very good presentation. We also have representatives from the Kentucky Association Chief of Police. If y'all wanted to come up and join Chief Cox, we'll let them give their short presentation, and then we'll have a couple of questions here. Representative Donahue has a question. We'll get to that.
Sorry, should remember to do that. Good morning, Chairman Mills and Chairman Meredith and esteemed members of this committee, and thank you for the opportunity to allow us to address you today, and especially to move us up on the agenda. We're in the middle of our 49th annual conference, so we appreciate you giving us an opportunity to move up on the agenda and present. My name is Sean Butler. I'm the Executive Director for the Kentucky Association of Chiefs of Police, and this is Chief Rob Nader from the Covington Police Department here with me today. We certainly appreciate this opportunity because this is an issue that all of our communities are struggling with, whether they're large or small. If you look at the numbers around the state right now, everywhere from the state police are down several hundred to Lexington, Louisville. Chief, I want to say you're down.
I'll be down 8 tonight.
Eight tonight. You have Owensboro is down 25 officers. Bowling Green is down 14 officers. It's staggering, but think about what that does to the 10-man department that are many of our departments around here when they're down 2. That's 20% of their agency that are policing your smaller communities. And this is an issue that not only touches the larger communities, but it touches our smaller communities in a very negative way. Obviously we've all been through COVID. We know the problems there. That has exasperated this problem to try to get our people trained and get them into the academy. And I know the commissioner is here and they're going to speak to that. We really are going to have to be creative because we have to get people trained and we've got to get them in. Let's face it, policing is a dangerous job. The last year, it's proven that. There's been a lot of negatives, a lot of misunderstanding about what the police do. There's been a lot of loss of respect for the police in our society, and that's sad. And we've got to work, as the chief said, to tone the rhetoric down, such as the defund the police. And I will tell you, I'm glad I live in Kentucky. We've had our problems, but we have a very supporting community out there that has supported our officers. We just have to look at these, and we've got to be creative. When I was a chief, I retired 6 years ago. When I was an early chief in the early 2000s in the city of Independence, I had 35 officers. We routinely had 300 people take our test for one spot. When I left in 2015, I retired, we were lucky if we had 35. Those numbers are even less today. The running joke in some communities, and I'll use Northern Kentucky as an example, Chief Nader and I discussed this on the way down here today, is we have an applicant pool of about 35 people that revolves around all of Northern Kentucky that we're all trying to pick and choose from. Our salaries are very similar in that area. Benefits are very similar in that area. People are just not coming into this field, and we have to look for ways to overcome this. And the chief, Henderson chief here, came up with some great ideas. But now I'm going to turn this over to Chief Nader. He wants to give you some thoughts, and then I have a few additional closing remarks, and we'll be glad to take any questions you may have.
Chairman Mills and Meredith, members of this fine committee, once again, thank you for having us here.
Do you have your mic on? Is there?
I don't. Now I do, I bet. Is that better? Cool. But removing new hires from Tier 1 to the Tier 3 system with a potentially unreliable 401k hybrid system, coupled with that, what is widely seen as a minimal health care insurance, is dramatically affecting local law enforcement departments' ability to recruit and retain officers. We implore you to revisit some of the decisions that have been made to state's retirement system regarding law enforcement. Failing to make changes means fewer applicants, which we've been talking about, will be drawn to the profession, and that means fewer officers protecting the people, businesses, and communities back home in your legislative districts. We understand that difficult decisions had to be made regarding pensions, but you must also realize that there are unintended consequences for some of those decisions, and we are seeing that play out now with the ongoing difficulty in attracting and keeping officers. For example, tonight I have 6 retiring, and the last time we had the changes, the actuary changes, I lost 9 in a month, and we've never been able to recoup. That was right before COVID. We would also suggest changes to the law that is designed to make it financially difficult for an officer to leave a community that paid for his or her training. Under existing law, a recruit officer must remain with the city that sponsored and paid for their training for 3 years. If they leave prior to the 3 years of service, they must repay their training costs to that city. That has certainly helped in keeping young officers from having their training paid for and then leaving to another higher paying job in another community or state. And that is an acute problem in communities like Covington. We border Ohio right across there, river, and of course they still have their pensions. We suggest extending the time an officer has to remain with the city to 4 or even 5 years. This will keep officers at their jobs for a longer period of time and allow cities to recoup the return on investment. So basically, 3 years, an officer hits their stride. By 5 years, they're more comfortable. They understand working with people better. That's when that's their prime. We're losing them before that. Up in Northern Kentucky, it's very competitive. As Director Butler is saying, we had the same applicants. We're processing them. Another department finds out we're processing them. They're making a conditional offer before we can because of their legislative cycle. where they can go before the council. And we're finding out it's the same 28 people. That's all we're having. So, and I have a lot of spots to fill. They'll talk about the academy and how they have a backlog, but I've never seen it like this. We've done some of the, almost all of them already in the last several years that Henderson has, the same changes. Public safety officers, we've had it. We've had it since the 70s. They're called cadets. They're part-time jobs, do the same thing. We can't get anybody to apply. We went to our local high schools. We're offering to pay for their tuition to Northern Kentucky University, and we're getting nobody. We got a couple, I like to say kids. I grew up in the same town, St. Augustine, Holy Cross. We all went there together. Of course, they're a lot younger than me. And we had one, and they quit right away, first day on. Of course, we had a shooting that day, and I can understand. But that's where we are. So we're here asking for your help. We will take questions following our testimony, but at this point, I would like to turn it back over to Executive Director Butler. Sean.
A couple of things that we've looked at, and we've talked extensively with Commissioner Jellick and his staff about this, is the training. Some of the things that we would propose and we would like to work in the future with them is, and I know they're working very hard on this to help us, is remote training. So we can have our officers do some of their in-services remotely. You know, you can get a bachelor's degree now or a master's degree now online. And this could alleviate some pressure on our cities that are struggling and that they don't have as many officers on the street. If we could work towards a system where at least the in-service training could be done that way, you know, maybe not necessarily 40 hours all in one shot sitting there, but if it could be spread out over a year where they do a certain amount every month. You know, I don't tell you that I have the answer to that, but we look at that as a savings to the city because, one, they're not sending their officers to Richmond or wherever. That officer may be able to do a few hour training today and then move on, do some more of his training next month, and it keeps that officer on the street and in the city. Now, there's not every training can be done that way, obviously, but if we could come to some, and I know they're working on that, and I believe they're going to talk about some of those things. Those are some things that we think are very important that will help our cities keep officers that they don't currently have on the streets at home. Another thing, and I'm really going to date myself here, but that's okay. Look at all this hair I have from this field. In the early 90s, there was a program called the Police Corps, and it was funded federally. And what they essentially did is they would take college kids that were in college, and they would pay for their college or assist them to pay for their college. And then they were sponsored, and they went through the police academy here. And then they piped them out into the various departments. And they had to do a commitment of 3 years with that department. It was a very effective program. Unfortunately, like everything else, money cut the program off. We would ask if the state would maybe look at something along those lines or maybe work with our federal legislators to maybe recreate a program like that. But it was a very effective program. We think we need to work more, too, with the military and bringing in military officers that meet the qualifications in this state. And another big thing that we are very concerned about, and I'm a member of the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council, I represent the chiefs, is reciprocity in our state. Currently, when you say reciprocity for our state, I will use Alabama as an example. Alabama's police academy is 400 to 500 hours. Our police academy is over 800 hours. I think it's almost 900 now. I know they dialed it back. 824 hours. The formula that is currently used, you bring an officer in from another state that has 400 or 500 hours. They give them credit for 50 hours for each year that they have of experience. So, you know, the math is simple. You do the math. If you came from a 500-hour academy, you know, you're 8 or 9 years before the reciprocity would allow you to be an officer in Kentucky. We don't ever want to relax our standards, so I want to be very clear on that. We don't think that is what should be done. But we also believe there's 2,080 hours in a year that you work, no matter if it's 12 hours, 10 hours, or whatever the case is. We think there's something askew in that formula and how we're doing reciprocity. And we would like to take a look at something, if you're an officer that comes from an area that has a reputable academy, maybe after 3 years, you should be allowed to come into our state, not 10 years. And that enlarges our pool some, and we are going to propose that and take a look at that, and we're going to bring that up at the next council KLEC meeting. But there's just we have to be creative in all of these ways, and I agree with Chief Nader. I understand you all had to fix the pension. I get it, and Senator Thayer and I have had this discussion many times when I was a chief. But there are some unintended consequences. And here's the biggest example I'll give you. In 2019, when they did the actuaries, that probably should have been done for 50 years, it was devastating to the command staffs of the police departments around this state. Owensboro lost their entire command staff with the exception of their chief. Everybody took a look and said, you know what, if I don't go before December, I'm going to lose money. And I don't know anybody that wasn't touched in some way or another. And we lost a ton of experience in this state, and we lost a ton of leadership in this state, and we are not recovered from that. And then right after that, COVID rolled in on us, and it's just been a never-ending issue. So I appreciate your opportunity, as the police chiefs do, to give us this opportunity to come and address you. And we thank you, and we want to be part of the solution, and we know we need to be part of the solution and be at the table with you on this. So again, Chairman, thank you. Esteemed members of the committee, thank you, and we'll be happy to take any questions you have or assist you in any way we can.
Thank you, gentlemen. We probably have about 10 minutes for some questions here. We've already got lined up on the docket here. First, Co-Chair Meredith has a question for you.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate each of your all's roles and your staff's role across the Commonwealth. You know, you brought up a very interesting discussion, I think, in multiple presentations there. And I certainly understand the long-serving career perspective with regard to the pension system and things of that nature. But I also have to wonder a little bit, Chief Cox, you mentioned a lot about the millennial population that you're now working to recruit. And so I kind of have two questions. First and foremost is, with regard to the data that you brought up of folks staying in a career for 4, 5, 6 years on average in the millennial population, do you think that maybe front-end compensation, that $20 an hour or raising that hourly wage or that salary is more attractive to those folks than the pension benefits at the end of their career to help you maybe not retain the longer serving officers, but at least recruit your newer officers?
I think you're on to something. I really do. And that's where when I talk
Check
about...
your mic.
It's on. Can everybody hear it? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's
okay. Because this is kind of where I had to change my mindset too when I mentioned that in my presentation, that it's always you come 10, 15 years, you earn your stripes, and then you get better days off. You get, you kind of have to earn what you get, and you have to wait. It's like a farmer. You plant the seed, you water it, do all the hard work, and then you're going to get a crop at the end. I just don't see that mentality. That it's definitely something to look at, and that's kind of where with the schedule that I brought up, it goes right against my DNA as a senior officer to think that you change it. But it's almost like this is what reality says, that if we don't change, we're going to be left behind. And I think it's a good point, if y'all have comments on it.
And I'm on the front end of kind of that millennial generation. And I'm an odd case. I've been in the same job for 20 years. I mean, I don't fit the mold of that, but I see it with folks that I grew up with, graduated from high school and college with. They're moving around constantly, and maybe it's a totally different career than they started in. So I think that's a point that we need to make as we move forward with recruitment in the future. And the second thing was, I know we mentioned about the command staffs changing and some of those longer serving officers retiring. Do we have any good data on how many of those retirees that took the option to get out when they got out came back in some kind of a retirement?
Chairman, probably the data is out there. We've not collected. I know we've been working on some of that, but then unfortunately COVID struck us because we were trying to do some internal surveying to get some of that data and see what has come back. But so it's there. We just haven't gleaned it out yet. And I think that's very valid because I would love to see that data and how they're working and where they're going.
I would be interested to see a lot of that. I know a lot of guys that, at least in our area, they retire from one of the larger forces, whether it be Bowling Green or somewhere like that, and then they work as a chief or a part-time officer in some of the smaller towns. Just a little less action maybe as they've retired, but they're still out there providing the service to some community. Maybe it's their hometown where they were working in a bigger city during their main career. So I'd like to see that data too, if you all get that put together.
Representative Donahue has a short question.
I'd like to have ample time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for the presentation. This question I have was with Chief Cox. I worked a lot of overtime. I was in the automotive industry for 35 years, and my wife used to tell me all the time I was a different person when I didn't work overtime. So the only thing I'm curious about is that, and when I was in the administration aspect of it, is that the overtime on a consistent basis. Our max was 12 hours, but it wasn't on a consistent basis. And the reason I say that is because when you become mentally tired, mistakes happen. Okay, so I would really like for you folks to take a look at that, and see statistically what it's going across the country, because it may not be the answer for what you're doing. I understand the shortfall of people that you don't have. But I support law enforcement. I support the protection you provide. I support all the positive things you all do for us every day, and I'm very thankful for that. But there's some things, I think statistically, last time I read, that most folks nowadays usually have 9 jobs in a lifetime. I think I had 3, 4. They don't count this as a job. But the thing about it is that I hope that you take a good look at that, okay, and take a look at it, research it through the bigger police departments throughout the country and see if there's any kind of negativity to the 12 hours consistently. I understand there's times when you have to have other people come on board or don't show up to work, stuff like that. But on a consistent basis, I'm a little leery of that. So if you take a look at that, and I'd like to reach out to you, and I'd have some suggestions as well, too. But thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Thank you. Senator Thayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to welcome my friend and constituent, Chief Butler. And I remember that conversation that we had in your office. And as the primary sponsor of Senate Bill 2 in 2013, I'm now going to set the record straight on some of the comments made here today. First of all, Chief, it's not a 401k. And for you to call it that is factually incorrect. And it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're selling the hybrid cash balance plan as a 401k to your recruits, that's going to be seen as a negative. It is not a 401k. It is a defined benefit plan that has some of the properties of a defined contribution plan, but it is not a 401k. I spent a lot of time on that bill, lots of negotiations with the Democrats who controlled the House at the time. I spent a lot of time in that Governor Beshear's office negotiating the final bill, and it's not a 401k. And I would urge you guys not to have that narrative, because it's going to be a negative for your recruits. However, one thing that it is portable. And with the millennials in the workforce that you're trying to recruit, portability is a big concern. We've talked a lot here today about the fact that outside of Representative Meredith, most people don't stay in the same job for 20 years or 10 years or even 5 years. So that plan is portable, and you should remind them of that. If they get in and they decide they don't like policing and they want to try something else, I think they're vested after 4 years. They can take it with them. So I understand you guys don't like Senate Bill 2. I got to set another record straight. If command staff left in 2020, it wasn't because they were in the hybrid cash balance plan. They were probably in the Tier 1 or Tier 2 pension plans.
Tier 1.
So, because the Tier 3 hybrid cash balance plan did not go into effect until 2014. So to say that command staff was retiring, or to insinuate that they were retiring because of the hybrid cash balance plan, is factually incorrect, because they were very likely high in Tier 1 or Tier 2. Now, there may have been some issues with the actuarial analysis that is generally outside the purview of this committee and the General Assembly and controlled by the CERS board. But I felt like I needed to set the record straight as the sponsor of that bill. And I would hope that in future you would make sure that your narrative is accurate when talking about this plan. Now, I have a question. Do you think that the defund the police narrative that is being pushed by the left-wing media and politicians in certain parts of this country, do you feel that that narrative and that effort in some places to actually defund the police is having an effect on your recruits?
I tell you, absolutely. And Senator, I think that has a huge effect. It has a huge effect on the mindset of the people that want to do into this job. But if I may, can I swing back to the actuary for 1 second? Because I don't want you to misunderstand what I meant when I said that about the command staff. I did not mean that the command staffs were leaving because of Tier 3. Those actuaries probably should have been done for 50 years and our pension would have been in better shape. So I want to explain myself what that meant. The actuaries just came because my understanding is finally you all forced them and made sure these actuaries were going to be done. Any solvent pension, I would think actuaries should be done all the time. So please don't misunderstand that I thought that was Tier 3. My intent there was those should have been done all along. Maybe we wouldn't be in the position we are. I'm not an economics guy. I don't know. So that was my point on that is, but when it hit, you had so many people that in those upper positions that were Tier 1, still the old guys like me, that it was like, I'm going to lose $300 a month or I'm going to lose $200 a month if I stay. So that was my intent on that. I just wanted to be clear with that. But as for the defund the police, that's a hugely negative. If you're thinking about going into a field and you're hearing, we want to defund you, we want to give you less police, we want to do this in a job that's already not very safe, that has a huge impact on us. And that narrative needs to be changed. Hey, we by no stretch think that we are perfect and there's not bad apples in there. There are, and there are in any profession. But I would say that in the last session, we were here at the table with Senate Bill 80, and we said, you know what? You cannot have reform unless you give us the tools to have reform. Now, it kind of flew under the radar. I think that bill was a very good bill that was passed because guess what? It gives us the tool to get rid of the bad actors. And any reform starts there because you've got to get rid of those people that should not be in this profession. So to your point, we're trying to work this from all angles. And I understand your question too about many people change jobs 9 times in a lifetime or whatever. I would submit to you that most police officers stay in this job their entire career. Why? I don't know. And millennials may be different. But when I was growing up, this is what I wanted to do. I would submit that this is probably what you wanted to do, and I would submit that this is probably what he wanted to do. You talk to an officer, and a lot of times, right or wrong, I don't know if this is right, they identify themselves by their career. I'm a police officer. They're proud of that. And so, yeah, a lot of people move jobs and leave jobs, but this is not something, and that's what's so interesting to all of us now, this is not something that we have dealt with because you stayed. And the military guys, they came out, they wanted this profession, and they stayed in this profession. So I would tell you on our end, yeah, we're struggling to figure this out. And it is a struggle. I've had talks with chiefs all the time. We have to learn how to manage these people. It's not that we're going to manage them the way we were always managed. We better adapt and manage what the workforce is there now. So I understand that. And as far as the Tier 3, Senator, I don't understand that plan. And I'll just be quite blunt with you. But then again, I retired 2 years after.
Just remember, there's a guarantee for employees. Right. There are no guarantees in a 401k.
Look,
the hybrid cash balance plan has a guarantee.
I don't think you would find anyone in our profession, well, maybe not anyone, that would argue that if something wasn't done with that pension, that we were not going to have a pension. It was not going to be there. But there were some unintended things. Probably couldn't.
And we've made some adjustments.
Yeah. And I don't think that ever could have been changed. You had to do what you had to do, and we're just struggling now on all angles what we can do to get people in this profession and keep them.
And it may be generational. And like you said, you have to adapt. Working with you guys on Senate Bill 80 was one of the highlights of the session. This General Assembly backs the blue. We got your back. And we're not part of the defund the police movement. and we want to make sure that you guys know that. But I do think that is playing a role in your recruitment and retention efforts, because that has to play on people's minds when they're considering staying in or joining that career. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I have 3 more questions I want to get to. This is why we had the meeting today, to discuss these matters. Representative Thomas is next.
Thank you. Following Senator Thayer is always a hard act to follow there, but we appreciate y'all being here. I was speaking with one of our officers just recently, and he was saying, he has about 2.5 years before he retires, and maybe 2 years of working, because I think he's built up some comp time and stuff. But I said, well, would you be willing to stay or so? And he said, no, absolutely not. He said, I'm retiring, because the incentives aren't there for officers to stay longer. So he mentioned something to me, and I've just started the research on it a little bit, and there's a few states doing it. The DROP plan, deferred retirement option plan. So I'm starting to look into it a little bit, but are those some of the tools that we could offer you? I was thinking you could do it statewide, and for those on the committee, it's basically an officer could sit there and opt to work up to 5 more years after his stay, and he would actually live off the retirement. They would go ahead and start drawing the retirement, but the money that he would be paid salary would be banked in essence. And at the end of 3 years, they would write him a $150,000 check, or 4 years would be, whatever, $200,000 or so. Are those some of the tools that would be good that we could actually even do at local levels to give you that ability to do things like that?
I would have to research that a little more to give a informed answer. I know for us, the retired officer, because with CLEF, they'll make about 62, 66 retired thousand. So it is really good. I've had other officers who are close to retirement say, if you still have that in 4 or 5 years, I'm going to apply when I retire. So for us, I think the program we put in place is kind of going to combat that we already have in Henderson. But I will have to do more research before I could give you a really good
and I'm
informed
just in
answer.
the research stage too. I just thought, these are some of the things. How can this officer's getting ready to leave in a couple of years? I'm like, how do we keep him a little bit longer? So y'all have CLEF, but giving different tools to every community might be one of the ways we can combat that. So,
Representative, I'm a little familiar with the program. I know they do it in Ohio, but I certainly could not speak deeply about it. I believe their program is like 8 years, and is what they do is the city still pays the salary and their pension is banked. They're not allowed to draw it, but it's put in an account. That's my limited understanding. But certainly all those type of ideas, are out there to help retain.
Senator Alvarado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, gentlemen, for your presentation. I have 2 really brief questions. I know in my district I'm really blessed with great law enforcement. People in our community love our police officers, our sheriff's department. I don't think those guys have to pay for any of their meals anywhere they go. People take care of them. We've seen the national media. We know what's being said out there. And I can't help but think, Chief Landrum, who's in Mount Sterling, came to us from Memphis, where he used to be a police officer years ago, and left there and doesn't regret that, going from a very probably dangerous position to coming to Mount Sterling, where, yes, we have issues, but probably not nearly the same risks. Have we thought about, I wouldn't want to be a police officer in Minneapolis. I wouldn't want to be a police officer in Portland. I wouldn't want to be a police officer in Chicago, Detroit. Have you thought about going out and, to protect our own state, just to go out to those other areas to say, hey, listen, you want to continue to be a law enforcement person? Why don't you come to Kentucky, and almost do a marketing campaign, if you will, to help do that, to attract those officers? I don't know if there's an unspoken rule amongst police departments that you don't do that to each other, but you could poach a lot of officers from areas right now where it's really dangerous and probably not a very pleasant place to be a police officer. Have we thought about that?
Right. And that, Senator, thanks, and that's a very valid point, and that goes to the heart of the reciprocity that we need to get changed, because in a lot of these states, it's very difficult for us to bring them in. One great thing about Kentucky is we have great training, and we have a lot of great training. And to try to match it up under the current system, it is very difficult for us to bring those officers in, because you'll get some, and like I said, you that 50-hour credit, is it explained out, they just don't meet our standards. And then we basically are put in the position where they have to go through the entire police academy.
Okay, so that might be,
but the thought is there.
Might be something to work on, either to allow them credit for some of that, maybe consider doing something along those lines.
And that is being worked on at this point.
The second question I've got, I know, Chief Cox, you talked about the public safety officers, and as I was reading a lot of the responsibilities on here, I have to admit this sounds a lot like constables to me when I was reading the description here. Do these individuals that are, and I looked up the statute. Yeah, I know my guys are chuckling to my left here, but I looked at the statute. I don't see that there's any requirements as far as formal training for these guys. Are they required to have formal training or not to be these roles?
Yes, it said in the statute 120 hours of training. Let me pull that statute because I have it here. Because it doesn't specify. I know my conversations with Hopkinsville, they do like crash reconstruction, not reconstruction, but collision investigation through Northwestern. It's about a $1,200 course because it's not really specific on the exact type of training. So that's something I had very preliminary conversations, just mentioning in passing to the commissioner about that I could, when I mentioned this to him, I said, maybe we get touch base again and have a little more conversations. Because if this is something that goes across the state, it would be nice to have something more standardized to say these are the duties, this is what the statute allows, and this is how we should train them. So I'm definitely tracking with you that the training is a question, but it needs to be organized.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
One final question, Senator Southworth. We have another right behind us, so quick question.
Okay, this is for Chief Cox. I know everybody's different potentially, but what's the pay for the public service officers, and comparing that to, just give me like a couple of benchmarks, like your public service officer, your newish, your end game. What are we talking about numbers wise?
Oh, as far as just starting salary.
Yeah.
Because my conversation with the city manager, it would start at 17.
And that's, did you say it was a part-time position?
No, it's full-time.
Okay.
Is what I'm asking for authorization to hire, yes.
To start the public service officers?
Yeah, 17 per hour.
Okay. And then give me an idea about your regular officers.
They $19.73, not counting shift differential, of $1.25 or 75 cents.
One of the things that shocked me the most when I was looking at the KSP, and I know maybe our locals are different, but I was worried about teacher salaries, and I still am, but when I saw police salaries, it's just really embarrassing, frankly. I had a cousin, he just graduated from high school, maybe last year or before. He was planning on going to EKU. He'd been playing for a long time. He wanted to be a police officer. And I found out last summer he's not going to do it. And this is a kid, like one of the really good kids. I mean, there's some kind of rough ones out there, and there's some really good ones, and he was one of those really good ones. And I was really excited when I heard that he was interested, although I knew, like, yikes, what's going to happen. And he was very committed to it until, he was working during COVID in carry-out restaurant, making $1 million more than he ever will in his lifetime, police, and police is way more dangerous than the carry-out restaurant. And he has chosen a whole nother path. And I think this goes to what, Representative Meredith was talking about. In the younger generation, it doesn't even make sense to spend your whole entire career doing something that is not really going to go very far, pay-wise, and just adds to the stress of your life, and you don't need that. The other thing I wanted to ask about, and not really ask, but maybe just point out, you're talking about high school recruiting, and looks like we're trying to recruit in high schools, and the other group maybe has already tried and it's not worked. But I'm thinking high school might be a little too late to start addressing this issue of, when a bomb goes off, are you running away or are you running into it? And the police officer culture is we run into the problem. And the current educational culture is let's worry about your feelings and make sure nobody gets hurt and make sure that everybody is, dancing around in eggshells. It's very difficult to me that our current culture with our children being trained to dance around eggshells and not hurting one's feelings is really going to be the type of recruits that we can get to run into bombs. So I'm thinking perhaps the education, it's like we used to have the DARE officer when I was in school. Maybe we need to be looking at, backbone building exercises for our students from young ages so that some will be interested in going to that extra mile to become those public servants.
Thank you, Senator Southworth. And gentlemen, thank you. This is the exact conversation we were needing to hear and that we wanted to have. So following right up behind these gentlemen are some folks from the administration from DOCJT, and we'll have them move up. I know it. I got a tongue twister. We have the commissioner and deputy commissioner and section supervisor, and they're going to real quickly, gentlemen, just so you know our time constraints, we have to be out of here by 11:30 or just a few minutes after that. So thank you for being here, and please feel free. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman, Co-Chair, and committee members for your time today, and we'll try to be judicious with it. To my right, I've got Deputy Commissioner John Schwartz, and to my left, I've got Joe Wallace. He is the section supervisor for our firearms section. We're prepared today to have material for both speaking to the need for a range, but also a lot of the questions was about that we had presented to us about our training post-COVID, where we're going. And I believe, Chairman, you prefer that the second is where I should start? Okay. So just for short edification for the committee to make sure you understand, in Kentucky, we have a wonderful system, a centralized system of standards, and pretty much overall a centralized system of training that's overseen by the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council. In Kentucky, we've got 5 approved academies through the council. We've got 4 of the 5 service only one agency each. It's Lexington, Louisville, KSP, and Bowling Green. The remaining 430 plus law enforcement agencies across the state, most of whom employ officers and sheriff's deputies who keep your constituents safe, which is a majority of the state, those all rely on DOCJT and currently in Richmond. Our training regimen, we've got separated into 2 basic sides. We have a basic side and an in-service side. The basic side of the house, that is our training for folks to get them prepared to become certified to begin their careers in law enforcement. The in-service side is our professional development side. That's once you're certified and you're on the street, that we have a mandated 40 hours a year that you have to go through every year, and that is, again, to kind of develop you professionally throughout your career. One of the big issues that has been a topic over this past year, the things that have kind of come to a head we talk about the backlog of training. And what is a backlog? Well, if you were to go today to want to enroll someone in our basic training, so I'm going to talk about the basic and in-service separately. If we're going to talk about the backlog when it comes to basic, currently the chief was correct. We had openings through November, but the November class is filling up, and we have a class starting in December that now has openings. Normally, pre-COVID, we would have about a 3 to 4 month backlog. So we're starting to catch up to the backlog that we had pre-COVID. And I want to acknowledge that because DOCJT historically for many years has run, depending on the ebb and flow of the recruitment and retention of agencies over the years, that backlog has been small. And at times when there is a large need for training, there have been a lot of retirements or resignations, then that obviously would equate to an increased need in that basic training. So over the years, that has fluctuated. Normally, pre-COVID, we would be operating in our basic academy with about 4 classes running simultaneously. They overlap by about 5 weeks. So when we have a recruit class graduate, which we just had, and Chief Cox had one of his recruits graduate just last week, right away on that Thursday that they graduate, that next Sunday we have the freshman class enter in. So we constantly have about 4 classes running at once. Each class has approximately 30 recruits. We run about 10 a year, so it's about approximately, under normal operating conditions, about 300 recruits, basic recruits a year. On the in-service side of the house, pre-COVID, we would have also about 30 officers or deputies or detectives per class, and we'd have roughly about 200 separate classes that would be scheduled in our in-service catalog throughout the year. So kind of that brings us to where I wanted you all to have some perspective so we understand kind of where we are this year. Moving into 2020, soon after I became commissioner, when COVID hit, we shut down for about 3 months. A lot of that was we were kind of reeling from trying to understand, the risks and what was going on and how best to mitigate that. And we immediately saw how that shutdown was going to affect the hiring practices and the ability for agencies across the state to be able to maintain their manpower. We worked very quickly with some CDC doctors to try to understand the science so that we could best mitigate the risk, understanding that we can't completely go without the risk, but we did our best. And obviously the basics, social distancing was the primary thing, and some testing procedures. And we worked well with partners across state government to be able to accomplish both. So what that looked like for us, we have 4 stories of dorm rooms in our dorm in Thompson Hall. And because of COVID, we weren't able to have 2 recruits per room, which is what we normally would do, which would allow us a certain training capacity. So we had 1 recruit per room, and that was kind of the core of our safety plan, was to try to keep the recruits isolated as much as possible, try to keep each class of recruits isolated from the other classes, and then with the goal of kind of having these isolated pods to where if we were to have a COVID positive case, it would have the least amount of effect on everybody else. Facilities-wise, our classrooms that we had were designed for pre-COVID times when you could sit next to each other and it was no big deal. With the 6-foot rule, to try to minimize any quarantining necessary if we did have a COVID case, we were separating our recruits by 6 feet. That we had some limitations with our facilities because not all of our classrooms were designed to have 30 recruits separated by 6 feet. So some of our classes, we had to lower the class size down to 25, and that was also the same with our in-service. So we started back in July of 2020 with 3 classes, and the reason why we had 3 was because we used the top 3 floors of our dorm, which have the most dorm rooms per floor, and we had 1 class per floor, again, to try to limit the contact between the classes. Because of the shutdown, logistically, we were unable to carry out our in-service class catalog last year, which we sought the 32-hour waiver. We're grateful to have received that waiver, with one exception, which was PCIS. We brought PCIS back in the fall of 2020. It was the one in-service class that we did hold in person, and the primary reason for that was because of the way PCIS is structured. It's not on our campus. We host PCIS at a church that we partner with in Lexington, and because of the way that was put together, we were able to host PCIS in 2020. So moving on, 3 classes at once was not enough. The backlog was still significant. So starting in January of this year, we brought back a 4th class utilizing the 4th floor of our dorm. And so normally we would have in-service that would be on our campus with officers from other agencies that attend our in-service would be coming to Richmond, staying in our dorms. Because all of our dorms are occupied with recruits, 1 per room, we had to push out our in-service catalog across the state, which for the first time we ended up utilizing quite a few off-campus sites to hold our training, which on one hand could be seen as a bit of a benefit because we were likely to have at least a few in-service classes close to wherever your agency is. But on the other hand, we had to have fewer officers per class, again, because a lot of these sites did not have the room to accommodate a lot of people spaced 6 foot apart. So for 2021, this year, we have 20 to 25 officers per class with about 250 classes. So lower number per class, but we expanded our catalog to be able to accommodate the difference if you do the math. So moving into 2021, in January of this year, we brought back that 4th class. I've got the most ingenious and dedicated staff, and I say ingenious because if you imagine we've got 1 gym, 1 range, 1 driving track, and 1 facility with classrooms, trying to have 4 classes that have very minimal contact, if any, that are utilizing the gym at this part of the day, the track in this part of the day, the range at this part of the day. It is a very complicated puzzle that I would not be able to clearly describe other than what I'm saying, to keep everybody moving on time. We have 40 hours a week to train and 20 weeks to do so. We've got to be very judicious with our time. Obviously, any overtime that's incurred by any officer, we don't employ the officers, we just train them. That overtime cost is then something that ends up being the responsibility of the home agency. So we're very judicious with that time, trying to stay within the 40 hours. But they were able to figure out, amongst that complicated schedule, that we had a bit of a gap. So starting in June, the very end of last month, we were able to drop in a 5th class. So it's an additional class on top of the already complicated 4-class structure. And we have identified another a gap in our scheduling to where we're going to be able to drop an additional class, another additional class at the end of the year. So now between the additional classes that we've added, we are now pretty much caught up to where the backlog was pre-COVID. We are about 3 classes or so away. So if you needed to bring somebody in now, you were about 3 classes away. So we're starting to catch up to pre-COVID. Again, issue being we are here to serve the agencies. That is our sole existence, is to provide the training that they need. And it is challenging for us. That backlog is a kind of a manifestation of that challenge. We are operating in facilities with manpower levels that were, the facilities were constructed, a majority of them, 20, 30 years ago. At the time that they were built, the last big construction project we had around a little after 2000 were built for what they needed in 2000. The range and some of the other buildings that were built in the early 90s were built to accommodate the training needs of the early 90s. Here we are in 2021. We've clearly seen there's some very significant change in trends that the chiefs just testified to that we are all trying to wrap our heads around. And what I see, the numbers are starting to indicate for us, if they bear out, as the chiefs testified, the load for the need for additional training is going to do nothing but increase. And, for us to be able to meet that need and be able to take care of our staff, because our staff also, they talk about, these officers that are working many, many hours. Our staff, highly dedicated, highly committed, amazing staff. They're always willing to step up to handle that need. But we are running, I would argue, with these extra classes, slightly over capacity. We've been running at 100% now for quite a while, and anybody who operates a business or any kind of agency understands if you operate at 100%, there is no room for any contingencies or any kind of emergencies. And that is what we saw last year through COVID. We were already operating at 100%, so then you have an emergency, now we're behind. So we're doing our best to catch up, but I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I don't mean to run at 100 miles an hour, but I want to make sure that I have time to answer any questions that you all may have. One of the big issues for us, and I've got to say thank you to Dr. McFadden with EKU, for that 5th class, for us to be able to accommodate that, we've maximized our space. Eastern Kentucky University that we share space with there in Richmond, Dr. McFadden and I had some meetings, and we were able to work out a contract where we have use of some of their dorms. And that is how we're able to have that 5th class. But because of the arrangements, the living arrangements in the dorms, they have to live close together. So that additional class, the only way you're going to get in that class is if that recruit is vaccinated. And that is a significant issue for us. We would be able to utilize our space, our current dorm space, and start doubling people up to a room if we saw higher rates of vaccinations amongst our recruits. Right now, I think the last class that came in, we're hovering around 10% of our recruits are vaccinated, which makes it challenging for us. And the reason why, if we have a class, and we've had this happen at least once, where you have 1 or 2, it was about 2 months ago, we had a class where 2 people tested positive for COVID. And in our subsequent investigation, those 2 had close physical contact with almost the entire rest of the class. That meant that almost the entire class had to quarantine for 2 weeks. And with that intricate schedule, they were lucky that we had a down week over the 4th of July week. DOCJT has very rare down weeks where we don't have any recruits. And our hats off to my dedicated staff. They were willing to come in during a week that they normally try to burn some comp time. They were able to come in and keep that class caught up, but that is not always going to be possible. So we're running a super, super tight ship, doing our best to stay on top of it. Hopeful, like everyone else, that we can move past all this COVID business. But I think it's time for us to be thinking about the future, just as your predecessors did 20 years ago and 30 years ago with those capital projects. They were thinking for the future, and they brought us to where we are today. And I think it is now time for us to try to heed this call and figure out where we need to go moving forward.
Very good, Commissioner. Thank you for your presentation. We've got 4 questions lined up here, and that'll pretty much take our time up today. Co-Chair Meredith has a question.
Nick, you mentioned the low rates of vaccination that you all are experiencing within the recruit population that you're dealing with. Just interested, have you all delved into that anymore and kind of surveyed those folks to see what the reluctance is? Seems to me, emergency service workers, healthcare professionals, first responders were one of the first groups to have the opportunity to be vaccinated. And they're going to be the folks who are on the front line dealing with folks and most of the time not being able to stay 6 feet away from others. So I just wondered about, have you all delved into and surveyed to get a feeling of why you're seeing those low rates? Because I think that's statistically low even amongst the general population.
No, great question, Representative Meredith. Great question, and I'll be honest with you, we have not. And I think we're just starting to bear out some of these statistics to be able, where I can say we have about 10%. We've only had a few classes here recently where that's really become an issue now. More and more, especially looking forward, trying to figure out how we can further diminish this backlog. That's a great question. One idea, Dr. McFadden and I had talked, we had lunch together last week, was trying to figure out if they'd be willing to help support like a little pop-up vaccination clinic there at our academy. But absolutely, and every new class that comes in, I talk to them about that if they're going to choose to not be vaccinated, there is a high risk and liability there that they may end up shutting down the whole class, just 1 or 2 that test positive. But it's a great question, and I will we'll look into that for you, sir, and I'll get you an answer.
Thank you.
Representative Kaney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in case someone here doesn't know or someone watching doesn't know, DOCJT is funded through a insurance tax of 1.8%. But I don't know how Louisville, Lexington, and Bowling Green's academies are funded. Can you?
So when I understand, we are required to offer training, and Louisville, Lexington, KSP, and Bowling Green, they have decided to, for their own reasons, to have their own academies. Some of them traditionally have had their own academies for quite some time. I know Bowling Green is new. I can't speak to all the reasons behind their creation of their academy. But no, they pay for those academies on their own separately.
You said you get about 300 recruits in classes. How many of them actually get through the process?
We graduate. We don't employ those recruits, and I don't know, Deputy, the number of recruits that enter into our academy time that don't make it through. I don't think is very high.
It's a very small number. We have a great staff, and they spend a lot of time. And one of the things that when I speak to the class when they start, I tell them one thing you have to know, as great as our staff is, they don't read minds. And if you need help, ask for help. And to their credit, the recruits do ask for help, whether it's in firearms or in the classroom or in physical training. And our staff will take the time. And a good example of it is our legal staff, our attorneys who are instructors will stay after hours and have little group sessions to try and help, because legal is a very important portion of their training. And they are that dedicated where they will spend the extra time to help make sure that nobody is left behind.
If I may, very quickly, Mr. Chairman, because it kind of ties into the last presentation, can you talk about the requirements on both the front end and the back end to get through the process?
Yes. So the requirements are set out by the Kentucky Law Enforcement Council. In order to be hired, there's a process set forth in law that the council enforces about. There's a suitability screening, physical fitness test, polygraph. Once they get through those in the agency and KLAC gets them through all the pre-certification business, then they coordinate with us to inform us that yes, they are indeed a viable candidate. And
high school diploma,
correct.
Drug use,
there's
past criminal history,
correct.
Anything else?
An age, I think 21. I think we pretty much anything. I think you pretty much hit them.
And on the back end, the physical fitness is what, a 8-minute mile, 9-minute mile you have to run. And
I'll be honest with you, I don't recall the current what they are, but they're stringent
if you could
enough.
send those to us, that'd be great.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
We
Mr.
can get
Chairman,
them to you.
thank you.
Very good. Representative Bentley has a question, and we'll have one more after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have kind of a two-part question. First of all, Commissioner, what is the parameter that most determines what your 100% is?
The parameter, well, we've got it really determined. It's determined, I believe, by the number of classrooms we have, the use of the facility, and our staff when it comes to working full time. So we have X number of instructors, X number of classrooms, and when our facilities are being used 100% all the time, that is 100%.
I kind of understood you to say it was dormitory rooms a minute ago.
That is part of our facility use. We have about 136 dorm rooms, I believe, roughly. So about four stories, and they currently every single room that is functioning has a recruit in it.
Well, my point is, you got one to room.
Correct.
In 1968, Eastern put 3 men to a room because of the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could still do that if you wanted to increase the number of people.
Well, the issue currently, normally we would have 2, but it's with COVID because we don't have enough vaccinated recruits, and having 2 unvaccinated recruits staying in the same dorm, the CDC highly advises against that. We're not able to do that.
Second part is, what training do you do in mental health? I mean, in educating an officer about PTSD himself or the public, or AD or bipolar or schizophrenia, how to identify that patient or that perpetrator, what training do you give them?
We've got, so there's maybe, forgive me, sir, but there may be a 2-part to that. When it comes to, are you talking about the mental health issues amongst the general public that the officer may have to encounter? Or are you talking about the mental health issues for the officers themselves?
Both, yes.
Both. When it comes to officers, the officers' mental health and wellness, Representative Fleming and I believe Senator Carroll both sponsored a wonderful bill a few years ago. PCIS is a program that has been amazingly successful in the state. And from that has spawned some other classes that we now have. We've got some resiliency classes. We're moving into space with peer support and suicide prevention. So there's a lot of expansion happening in that direction. When it comes to training for officers regarding folks that they're going to meet on the job, there's quite a bit of training through what they call the CIT program. And Deputy, I don't know if you've got some additional details on that.
During basic training, the recruits are exposed to the most common people that they may encounter to understand schizophrenia, different mental illnesses, dealing with people with special needs, autism. And then after they graduate, there are several in-service classes dealing with that subject, either directly or indirectly. As the Commissioner alluded to, the CIT, Crisis Intervention Training, which is a highly sought-after class that is put on by an outside vendor, but is free to all law enforcement officers in the state. I think it's a very worthwhile program that provides them with a lot of the information they need to de-escalate situations. That's part of our de-escalation training. And there is also another class that we partner with, and I cannot remember the name, but we partner with CHFS and bring in trainers to teach law enforcement, again, with more detail. Basic training, we're very, very limited in what information we can provide. We give them entry-level information, and then in service, they get more information with this class where they're exposed to more information and more details on how to deal with people who may be in crisis or understanding what the individual, what status the individual may be in, so that they may choose the proper tools in addressing that.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. And our final question is from Representative Fleming. The question may be a holdover from last section for Chief Cox, maybe.
Could you give me a perspective on the number of, and this is statewide, number of authorized officers, number of employed officers, number of people are in training, those sorts of things? Do you have an understanding of what those numbers, how they shake out?
I can speak to what we're responsible for training. We provide training for approximately 56 to 6,000 officers a year. Now that'll be more. That could be closer to 8,000 because officers from Lexington, Louisville, Bowling Green, and KSP can choose to attend our in-service training. So it can range in between like 5,600 all the way up to 8,000. And if they take multiple classes, we can train upwards of 9,000 people.
Okay, thank you. And I appreciate that statement. That's not really my question. My question is looking at total authorizations of officers throughout the state. The number of employed officers that are serving now, the number are in training, and then number are, and also I didn't mention this last time, the number are retiring. Because I think that's very important, and y'all are a valuable resource in training officers throughout the state. And part of what I can perceive your responsibility is to not only train these officers, but also to look at reciprocity issues, looking at marketing, bringing folks in here, trying to encourage a higher pay, better benefits, and so forth. So, if you have those numbers, I appreciate it. If you don't, could you send them to me? Because I really think there needs to be a whole lot more effort and understanding of what our issues are, because there are some issues going on in defunding the police. I mean, we've had some issues going on in Louisville for a long time, and I can tell you the numbers we're being hurt because we can't attract the officers. And there are poaching going on within Jefferson County, from St. Matthews to Shively to J-Town, because those officers in Louisville Metro are leaving because of the whole sorts of things.
And you're absolutely correct. Data is critical, and DOCJT is responsible for a comprehensive survey that we do every 3 years, and we're in the middle. I think we just sent that out or just got it back. We're in the middle of compiling that data for this report that will be issued here, I think, by the end of the year. But that report will have a lot of the information you're looking for. Now, granted, like a lot of surveys, we are dependent on agencies responding. But from what I understand, the preliminary numbers from the group in my department that is responsible for this, that the numbers were pretty decent for survey responses. Yeah, absolutely. I can get you some of the past reports to you kind of see some of the trends. But this report will give you a lot of information about where pay is currently for officers, what the age ranges are for officers. Kind of what the allotted strength with different departments. There's quite a bit of data, and that comprehensive report is just for exactly that purpose, is to help inform you as policymakers and us to help figure out where we need to go moving forward. And I will say, I'm a proud graduate of Police Corps that he mentioned. I was in Police Corps 4. I was a fourth class before they shut. I think it was the last full class. Amazing program. Some of the officers that I graduated with are some amazing officers across the state. I don't want to steal any thunder from KLEC, but there's a lot of planning right now ongoing about how to integrate and how to partner with the military. There's some really interesting programs Director Moberly is working on. I've been fortunate to have a little part in that, but the council is really doing some great work to address reciprocity, doing some great work to talk about, again, how to fold in
our veterans returning to service, from service. So I think there's a lot of things on the horizon that will hopefully address some of these issues, but we're obviously always open to new ideas from the legislature. So
thank you. I was raised to show show my work through efforts and so forth, and not more of just talking about it. So I sure hope to show proof in the pudding by showing those things in actual action items, and instead of giving us some I don't want to say lip service, but just giving talk. We got to have some things hit the ground sooner rather than later.
I clearly hear you, and we are well on our way. Again, I'm very excited about what's coming up.
Very good. Commissioner, thank you for your presentation and for being here. If you would, if you notice, members, we mentioned in our packet we were going to talk about the firing range, and we do not have time for that. If you could email us some kind of report about the need there, and maybe some pictures for folks that need pictures.
Actually, we've got a short
And,
video as well, but we will gladly email out. We've got a report and a one-page flyer and that video. We'll happy to distribute that.
Okay, and I was told that it's already online on the LRC website, what you have submitted. So that would be a great place to go. And then finally, our next meeting is going to be August the 26th in Louisville at the State Fair. That's a Thursday. So I think there'll be state and local government there on that Thursday. So, gentlemen, thank you so much. If there's not any other comments, we'll stand adjourned.
Thank you.